Could the Auburn Tigers steal a 5-star recruit from Alabama? Ho, buddy.
Well, Zach, I actually just finished crushing some chicken farm, and I am freaking ready to rock and roll.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. It's a recruiting Thursday with John Garcia Jr., the head man over at SI, covering all things football, recruiting, and of course, our recruiting insider here at the Locked On Podcast Network. John, people cannot stop talking about Jahlil Hurley. The idea of the fact that, okay, maybe even though he's committed to Alabama, it seems like Auburn has continued to shower him with love and reach out with their long stretched arms and say, come on, Jahlil Hurley, come on to the Plains. Are they right to feel this optimism around a guy like him?
Well, look, it's certainly right off of a visit, right? And I think this isn't his first visit to the Plains since committing to Bama. So when you start to, use that old adage in this business, track the visits, man. I get asked about Arch Manning every day. Track the visits. Has he been to Ole Miss, in several months? No. So he's probably not going there, right? So track the visits in recruiting always. And Jahlil Hurley is beginning to visit Auburn more than Tuscaloosa. And that is something that is certainly noteworthy in the recruiting space. Now you take it back further. Okay, before he committed to Bama this spring, what did his recruitment look like? Well, he took more visits to Auburn than to Tuscaloosa. So you start to see a pattern, and you obviously know that the bond with Bryan Harsin and Zach Gethridge, probably more specifically, is something that is real. And it's something that not only Jahlil, but his family is starting to ask more questions about. Now here's where it gets interesting, right?
Right.
Timeline. Okay. Is there a time, and I haven't talked to Jahlil, but I did get a phone call about this yesterday from a good source. What is the timeline for some kind of final decision? Because the kid's already made one verbal commitment. So nobody's going to ask him, hey, when are you making this final commitment? Like it's going to be a flip or not at this point. How soon do you do it politically? How smart is it to do it very soon? There's so many other things that go into this, especially when it's an in-state kid flipping from one school to the other in this Iron Bowl rivalry.
Yeah,
there's so many things that go into it because we have precedent, right? We've seen kind of how it goes for kids going to one versus the other and then changing their mind at different points. But typically, Zach,
it's been very one-sided, John.
Well, I didn't want to say it. But typically,
AJ Yeldon flashbacks happening. Yeah, right.
But when Yeldon and even Reuben Foster and these guys, when they did it, it was late. It was late in the cycle. It's not even May. So
right.
I'm curious, just human to human, how smart is it to do it now if you're going to do it? Either you just kind of deal with whatever's coming now and then get over it, or do you kind of hold off and just take a little bit more data and evaluation in before the final call? But either way, this is legitimate smoke about Auburn potentially flipping Jahlil Hurley. Yeah. I haven't confirmed any upcoming visit plans. And look, not a lot of visits are going down now anyway because of spring practice at Florance High School where Jahlil plays and everywhere else in the South. So he's probably not going to take a lot of visits, but coaches are going to visit him up in Florence. So that is something to track in the meantime. But it's fascinating. I don't know if an Iron Bowl flip I should have looked this up. I don't know how early an Iron Bowl flip has ever happened. And I think at the high profile level, this will be the earliest that I've covered. And that's a big deal because, like I said, elite kids typically don't flip. And if they do flip, it comes later in the game, especially when it's one rival to the other. So Jahlil Hurley is fascinating on just about every front. And he's really good, by the way. There's a reason why so many of us are tracking this story. He's arguably the best secondary prospect in the state. He's a long, rangy defensive back. He could play corner. He could play safety. He could probably play receiver at the SEC level, which I know that will probably excite Auburn fans in a different way.
What?
But yeah, he is a legitimate blue chip, borderline, 5-star, whatever you want to throw on him, all-American kind of guy. Jahlil Hurley can absolutely go, and he would instantly be the class headliner for Auburn because right now he's the class headliner for Alabama.
What would it say about Bryan Harsin and his legitimacy as far as recruiting in the SEC that I don't think he's earned quite yet? What would this say about his reputation if he were to pull this off before the season started?
Well, this would be the first head-to-head win against Nick Saban on the recruiting trail, and that is always a marker for any Auburn coach. Unfortunately, fair or not, that's the marker. Can you beat Nick head-to-head? Obviously, on the field is most important, but right underneath that is recruiting. Can you go in head-to-head and win one of those battles? I mean, I think the Woodyard kid last year was kind of a long-standing foregone conclusion.
I was about to bring him up. You saw it coming. Right.
But he still waited. So, that gets a whole nother thing. But can you beat Nick head-to-head on the trail? This would be the first true unanimous yes. And obviously, from a timeliness standpoint, my goodness, could this be just what the doctor ordered for Bryan Harsin? Perception, I will say it every day, as long as I have this job, perception is everything in recruiting. It really matters. It is a brand. It's much like, Twitter stock or Apple or Google, Disney, whoever you want to call out there. That stock has a lot to do with perception, and especially when you're dealing with teenagers. So getting that first win head-to-head with, the big bad wolf, I think would be monumental for Bryan Harsin, because now you do it once in state, you can you think at least you have a shot at doing it at other positions, and you start to buy back some of that benefit of the doubt that the staff probably lost this offseason.
And you mentioned headliner of the class. I mean, the trickle-down effect for some of these top prospects. There's not a lot of 5 stars to go around. And when you get one, especially with Auburn, because they're not loaded up with 5 stars. They get 1 or 2 a class, maybe. What kind of impact does that have with filling in the rest of the class for 2023?
Huge, especially in this 23 class in the state of Alabama is loaded, in particular on defense. And Hurley's right at the cusp of the top of that list. So it means these kids are going to take visits together. They're going to talk. They're going to kind of get a vibe for each other. Hey, where are you going? This is where I'm going. So when a big flip or commitment in general is made, it always has an impact, most within state lines, and then at the position, right? So other secondary targets can now say, well, dang, if I'm a good corner and I see that they just got this guy who's going to shut down that side of the field, well, maybe I'll come shut down the other side of the field, and we can kind of pair up and be this kind of great tandem that we've seen Auburn put together in the past. And we've seen a lot of teams piggyback great defenses that mask other things when you have 2 great corners. I think Cincinnati this past year was a great example with Kobe Bryant and Sauce Gardner. Not elite athletically defensively in the front 7, but man, those 2 could shut things down on the outside. Makes things a whole lot easier elsewhere. So I think those are intriguing possibilities. Zac Gethridge is a great recruiter individually as well, so be another feather in his cap. I mean, there's really no limit to where that trickle down would potentially lead. Again, especially with how loaded this 23 class is on defense in particular. I mean, between Hurley, AJ Harris, Tony Mitchell, I mean, there's 3 of the top 7 or 8 DBs in the country right there. I mean, it is so loaded at every position on defense, including the secondary. So it would be a big deal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's no question about it. It sounds promising. All right, in just a moment, I want to get John's thoughts about 2 other elite defenders, both out-of-state guys, and how Auburn fans should feel about them. But first, I want to tell you about betonline.net. Look, there are so many different things. If you're betting on the NFL draft tonight, BetOnline is the way to do it. They give you so many options. It's going to constantly be updating throughout the first round of the NFL draft. There's over-unders if you feel like a guy's going to fall. BetOnline.net's where you need to go to check all of this out. And if you think a guy's going to go early, somebody's going to possibly reach for a guy. There's a lot of over-unders as far as which picks guys will be taken, which is a ton of fun. So be sure to check that out. BetOnline, where the game starts. John Garcia Jr. All right, the first guy, or I guess the next guy I want to talk to you about, Jaden Osbery, the 4-star linebacker from Baton Rouge. A lot of Auburn guys really interested in his recruitment. He's got what I think his dad played at LSU. It seems like LSU is the favorite. He's from Baton Rouge, but Auburn has had success in the state of Louisiana a little bit lately. Shout out Trevon Reed, but tell me about this guy.
Well, his big brother is at Auburn, so that's a good starting point with Osbery. But like you mentioned, an elite recruit, certainly more coveted than his big brother, and I think that's why this has become such an intriguing recruitment. You can make the argument for LSU. Certainly, I mean, he's a Baton Rouge kid, not just Louisiana kid, a Baton Rouge kid. Which I was just in New Orleans this weekend. There's just a different when you're talking about Baton Rouge kids. They'll lose New Orleans kids to Bama or Monroe kids to other schools, A&M certainly. But when you lose a Baton Rouge kid, it just stings in a certain way. Like Dylan Moses got death threats when he left Baton Rouge. So there's certainly precedent there. It's happened, and there's a transition class that Ausberry is getting used to at LSU, and he did visit earlier this month. But Auburn's been on him for a long time, as we just talked about. They got his big brother signed, and that is not only an advantage in familiarity, which is important in recruiting, especially when you're a kid like this that's looking at coaching staffs that aren't very tenured at these schools. But man, you've got a daily check-in with everything going on at the program, the feel, the culture, the long-term stability. Some of the questions that we ask, and I'm sure you ask every day, you've got a better insight and access to those answers because your brother's on the team. Your brother's going through those drills. Is it hard? Is it too easy? Are they soft? Are they way too hard on us? I mean, what is the feel there? He's got those answers whenever he wants them. And that creates something even more than familiarity, which he has, of course, at both programs, LSU and Auburn. But there's a couple other schools that are trying to stay in the race as well. So it's not necessarily just down to these two, but I do think it feels like it's more of a Tiger versus Tiger battle in the end. I'm not sure on Ausberry's commitment timeline. I hadn't checked in on that in particular. Sure. But he's taken some visits. He's going to take more visits. He'll be back at Auburn, I believe, before he makes that final call. So that's another one that would be intriguing to track. And again, if we're talking about Auburn recruiting in general from a 30,000-foot view, defensively, you're just in a better spot. You're just in a better spot to contend for defensive recruits. That has been the constant at Auburn over the long haul, over 2, 3, 4, 5 different head coaches. So I do think that anytime it's a defensive recruit in particular, it has a little bit more oomph. And at the linebacker position, I'm a big fan of Christian Robinson. I live in Florida. I talk to a lot of Floridians that he was recruiting, and they just shine talking about him as a person. And I actually went to Florida's camp and watched him coach Shamar James for about 45 minutes, who is a Mobile guy, by the way. Sure. And I just understood it. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I get why kids love to play for this guy, because he's going to be hard on you, then he's going to love on you thereafter. Kind of that balance that is hard to find. So I thought that was I don't know how well received that hire was by the Auburn fans, but when I saw it, I was like, okay, this is a good one.
It was pretty quiet, John. There wasn't a whole lot of chatter about it, but I was looking at it. It's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And every linebacker that I've either read interviews or listened to interviews about or talked to myself, they mentioned Christian Robinson. So I think that's exciting. Real quick, before we leave Jaden Osbery here, 6 foot, 205. What do you like about his game specifically?
It's a modern game. Owen Popo was built very similarly coming out of high school. I mean, he was built like that as like a freshman in high school, but that's the modern linebacker. That's what it's become. It's a guy who can run sideline to sideline, but also give you almost a box safety feel in the coverage department. That you play great competition there at Catholic High School in Baton Rouge, and he's flashed as much as anyone on that team, despite being a younger guy until 2022 when he's kind of the senior leader. He can really run. He's a striker, comfortable in coverage, as I said. Again, just a lot of the modern linebacker traits that you look for and that you need in this day and age. I think he can run with a running back or a slot receiver, wall off a tight end, even if he's a little bit bigger. And his brother's frame being a little bit heavier shows us that he can handle some extra weight down the line too. So I think that's another advantage of recruiting the little brother is you kind of have a feel of where the
What are those
body's going to
genes
be.
like? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You get a little preview there of what the genes look like you said. So I think this is an elite linebacker type, probably top 5, top 10 guy at worst at the position nationally. So again, when you're contending for those kind of recruits, it's a bigger deal, especially in the hometown of a division rival.
No, that'd be huge. That'd be huge. All right, next up, Avieon Terrell, 4-star cornerback. He put out his top 5 since we last spoke. Auburn, Michigan State, Clemson, Texas A&M, and Kentucky. It seems like John Clemson's the favorite due to his brother AJ. We talked about the brother trend. We'll continue that going, I guess, for a second. But seems like Clemson's a favorite. But there are some experts out there that are picking Auburn in this. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, Auburn's done a really good job here. Again, going back to the first question with Zach Gethridge, there's a lot of familiarity there. Auburn has to recruit Atlanta always and forever. There's no, I don't care which coach ever comes into this job. That is maybe the first metro that you're thinking about over Montgomery or even Birmingham. So Atlanta area kids, you got to stay in the game for. I connected with a source there today around that school that did say Clemson 6 months ago was probably where he was going. Like it was probably kind of done. But a lot of changes at Clemson, right? I mean, Venables is gone. Assistant coaches have come and gone. So there's been a lot of change relative to even who his brother played for when he was winning that national title or 2 maybe at Clemson. So it's not the lock that everybody would have assumed it would be even 6 to 12 months ago. Clemson's still in it, though. I'm not trying to detract from their potential with Terrell, but I did hear from this source that said schools not named Clemson are pushing harder and more consistently than Clemson. So read into that what we will. There is a sense that the door's open is how I take those inferences. And this kid wants to get the decision done at some point this summer. So the timeline to push is certainly here and now. And I think Auburn and Kentucky have done a really good job beyond the Clemson footprint. I'm not sure about Michigan State or A&M in this top group. So I look at it as more of a sub-regional battle between Auburn, Clemson, and the Kentucky Wildcats. And I do think Auburn is in good shape here at this point. Again, how soon will he make the decision? You're in the sooner the better camp if you're Auburn, in my opinion. Right. But I do think that the recruitment has become far from a Clemson lock for the little brother of AJ Terrell.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So obviously a corner, right, when we talk about Avieon Terrell. So you would assume that Zach Gethridge will be heavily involved in his recruitment. And that bodes well for Auburn. I mean, the guy's track record, small sample size, but so far, I mean, absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, he can identify talent and he can develop. I mean, and then that at that position and the draft's going to be another feather in the cap for him to a degree. That position, it's so important. It's so important. You have to develop at every position, but I would say quarterback, cornerback, and offensive tackle are really the 3 that, man, if you're a good developer, you can coach anywhere because it's hard to identify those kids and develop them relative to the modern asks of the game. So I do think Zach Etheridge is one of the better DB coaches, both as a recruiter and as a coach as well. And that is something that's going to bode very well for Auburn on the trail. I think him and Robinson in particular, that's a strong group of additions for Auburn with the type of prospects you need in the back 7. To have those 2 leading that charge should give Auburn fans some comfort because it's going to keep you in the battle for a lot of big names.
Sure. All right, John, in just a moment, I want to ask you about Bryan Harsin's style. It seems a little bit different than what Auburn fans are used to under the previous regime right here on Locked On Auburn. John, before we jump into all of that, how can people find all of your written work and all the great things that you have going on right now with SI?
Yeah, just si.com/college. You'll get every college article that comes out, recruiting included, on the football and basketball front. Or you can check us out on social at SI All-American on all channels.
Yeah, the final SI 99 for basketball recruiting went out. There's a lot of Auburn on there. So
shocking, right?
Yep. Wrote about it a little bit at auburndaily.com, but yeah, highly encourage you guys to check that out. All right. So Harsin's style with all of this, you can say what you want about the dude, because I mean, he still has not won everybody over, unfortunately. But he's going to keep recruiting you despite you trending a certain way or you being committed somewhere else. And I don't know if we've really seen that at Auburn. Like, Gus recruited well, but it seemed like once somebody committed somewhere else, like they gave up on him. Is what Harsin's doing right now, is this just kind of everything he's doing is under a microscope, or is that something that's a little bit more bold and something we haven't seen around here?
Well, I think you have to be realistic in recruiting. I get asked by recruits, typically under the radar types, hey, what do I need to do to get an offer? I'm like, you need to be realistic first. You need to be self-aware of like where is your ceiling? If you're a 5'7" corner, your ceiling is not the SEC. It's just most likely based on, however many years that everyone's been doing this. So I think with Bryan Harsin, you have to understand that if you're Auburn, you're going to be in the game for major recruits, and you might not win those battles, but it's 2022. Decommitments are up across the board. Flips are up across the board. We just talked about one that could go down before May between Iron Bowl rivals. I mean, that's something I don't know if I've ever seen at this stage. So the player mobility movement at the top of college football, with the portal, with the one-time transfer rule, even NIL, has trickled down into the high school game as well. How many recruits weekly, Zach, tell me I'm committed, but I'm just committed. I'm dating her, but we're not married yet. So that's the analogy I still get once a week, just talking to random kids that are committed. The best coaches keep pushing because things change on a dime. I mean, look at what we just went through with the coaching carousel, right? How many of those kids were done with recruiting, legitimately done, and then, the coach that I thought I was playing for is now across the country. I don't want to follow him,
Sure.
Lincoln Riley. So I need to look at something else. Okay, this is a little bit closer to home. Well, they were probably my number 2 when I committed, so now maybe they're my number 1. Let's recheck in with those coaches.
Let's go check them out again.
Right. But if the coach stayed on you, there is no pivot. It's seamless. It's a transition where you're like, well, these guys have been on me the whole time anyway. I talked to a kid who just committed to Ohio State, and the same day, Alabama and Georgia told him, we're still here. So good luck. Good luck with Ohio State. Congrats, but we're still here. So that style is not popular in terms of the PC department, but recruiting is anything but PC. You got to stay in the game for kids. And not only for the fact that things change circumstance-wise, but the portal. I mean, you got to stay in with these kids because it could be. I mean, there's a kid that enrolled at Utah in January, and he's already in the portal a couple months later. So now the schools that were in it beyond Utah probably are getting phone calls. So it really, the player mobility era that we are in is it's rampant. It's all over the place in every direction at any time. So you have to keep recruiting kids that you like, regardless of their commitment status. Now you got to do it within reason. Okay. If you finished 6th, you probably should back off. You're probably wasting your time there because there are a lot of rules in place that limit the time you can do a lot of these things, particularly coaches on the road, in-home visits, official visits, all of that. You do need to be strategic. But if you were in that ball game, 2nd, maybe even 3rd or 4th in some instances, you have to at least check in with some of these recruits. And that's where it becomes more of a CEO type leadership style. Are you overseeing everything and checking it? Like, hey, have you checked in on this kid? I know he committed to Georgia, but have you checked back in on him? Managing your assistant coaches. There's so many other factors into that. But that style, that 30,000-foot view style that Harsin kind of projects as we're a CEO, this is a business. I do think that resonates with prospects that keep an open mind down the line. And you just never know what happens in recruiting. And what if they stop recruiting Jahlil Hurley? We just talked about him. They could have stopped. And nobody would have said anything.
He committed your class. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. But they didn't. And now they could be positioning for a flip. So it's a perfect time to bring that up. And it's the SEC, man. It's eat or be eaten. We all know that.
Right. John, I asked some of my listeners that are in the Locked On Auburn Discord, link to that down below if you want to join. But I asked that, hey, we're going to have John on every week. Are there certain guys you want to mention? And that's what a lot of these guys are from. But several said Braden Joyner, which has been committed since the start of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it's just kind of, we don't talk about him a whole lot. So just kind of, what do you think about Braden Joyner as a prospect? And then also, I mean, he's been pretty vocal on social media as well. You know, there's some guys that join and then want to help recruit, especially some of the guys that sign on early like him. Your general thoughts on him.
He's a personality, and I think you could see that through social media. He's a guy that is going to be a 4-year varsity high school starter in the trenches at high levels at Oxford before Auburn High School. So that says a lot. He's a kid who certainly is confident in his own ability. And I think he's the type of kid you want on your commitment list. He's going to further it. He's going to hype kids up. He's going to be another extension of the coaching staff. If recruits are curious about Auburn, they can say, hey, hit up Braden. You know, he's also an O-lineman, or he's also this, an in-state kid. You know, he can tell you more about what we like or what we want. So I think there's some value there. Every fan base should love that seemingly loyal, and in this case, local recruit on top of it. He checks those boxes, but I love him as a player. He is a grunt. He is an in-your-face point of attack specialist with lower body power that kind of wants to piss you off for 4 quarters. And he plays both sides of the ball. Right. So as an offensive line projection, he's got that D-line experience. I think they even handed him the ball last year at one point. I mean, he's a fun kid. He's just a fun personality. He's like the great value version of Christian Wilkins at Clemson, where you're like, he's a great player, but man, he's a character too. Yeah. He's got some of that in him. And those are the kind of kids you want on your commitment list, but beyond the obvious, right? You want a headlining quarterback. You want a great in-state player. You want blah, blah, blah. But you also want the guy who's going to help keep the class together and be present. And that is certainly what Braden Joyner is. I think he's going to have a huge senior season at Auburn High. He made that transition seamlessly last year, held his own against IMG. I was there for that game, and he impressed. You know, it's not flashy. It's not sexy. It's not something that's going to have 5 stars next to his name ever, but you need guys like that to win games. I think he could be a Keandre Jones type on the offensive line down the line, and he's going to have more experience than Jones at the same stage, which is certainly a good thing.
Right. John, one more time, how can people support you and find all of your work, my man?
Yeah, si.com/college or on social media at John Garcia _JR.
Yep. Easy to find and a must follow, folks. All right, we'll be back tomorrow right here on Locked On Auburn. See ya.